Welcome back to Comic Book History, episode 75. Yep, 75th episode of the series, which means 25 more to go until I have my 100th episode of this one. Now, my last episode, I talked about Laura McKinley, aka Wolverine, aka X-23. This one, I'm discussing a completely different character. Now, as far as I know, I did look it up. I have never actually discussed this character before. Now, here's something also interesting about this. This is, and I kid you not, this is the second ever black character I have ever discussed. Because you might be asking, Nick, did you ever do one on the Black Panther? No, I've never done one on Black Panther. Nope, never did. I've discussed some things about this character, but I've never had a full episode discussing him. Who am I talking about? Blade. Blade the Vampire Hunter, or as he was originally called back in his debut appearance back in Tomb of Dracula number 10, Blade the Vampire Slayer, which, by the way, he looked like this. That's not a joke. This is how he dressed. Yes. And he wore this look up until around 1998, when they had to change the look because of the movie. Yep. Now, even though, yes, he did first appear in Tomb of Dracula number 10, he was not a regular mainstay of the book. Who created Blade? Marv Wolfman and the late Gene Cohen. Fun fact about Gene Cohen and the Tomb of Dracula. Gene Cohen was the only artist that entire series. It's one of those rarities where an artist throughout this whole book had one artist. No change of artist, no guest artist. He drew every issue. Marv Wolfman was not the original writer of the book. And you're thinking, really? No, he wasn't. As a matter of fact, the original writer was Jerry Conway. Yep, Jerry Conway was the original writer of the book. And you're probably thinking, that's weird. And why the heck would they change writers for? Don't know why. They also had Bill Mann. They also had, get this, before even Marvel took over, they also had Archie Goodwin. Yes, he has since passed away. And the late Gardner Fox. Yep. And with issue number, I believe it was issue 7, if I'm not mistaken, that's when he took over the book. Let's see, I believe it was. Yes, it was issue 7. He took the book for issue 7, and he wrote the series up until the final issue. Issue 10 was his 4th issue he did for the series. And Blade just shows up on a boat that Dracula's on to fight him, and becomes pretty much his real long-time arch nemesis, where he would continually fighting him up until very recently. Yeah, he fought him on and off for almost 40 years. Now Blade's real name is Eric Brooks. This is something that's very rarely brought up, because unless you look it up, you probably would have no idea his real name is Eric Brooks. Now here's the thing. Originally, he was just a vampire hunter, and then later on they said they gave him vampire powers because of a retcon, where it was revealed in a flashback, a vampire by the name of Deacon Frost. Yes, that is the name of the vampire. Yes, he was also the main villain of the first Blade movie. I will get to that eventually. Where he actually bit Blade's mother when his mother was pregnant with him. And that's the explanation of how Blade got his vampire powers. Though at one point he was also bitten by Michael Morbius. Yes. Aside from appearing in the pages of Tomb of Dracula, he also appeared in such books as Vampire Tales, Adventure into Fear, and mostly he stuck to a lot of the adult stuff, and he never really interacted with the Marvel Universe that much. I mean, the only character he interacted outside of the Dracula stuff was Doctor Strange. And you're thinking, really? Out of all the characters he interacts with, the first one he meets is Doctor Strange? Yes, seriously. And after having a series of one-shot like solo appearances in the 70s, then by the 1980s, they had a storyline of pages of Doctor Strange where they got rid of vampires. Yep, the world was like the whole thing of eradicating vampires. Yep. Then pretty much after they kind of in a way kind of undid that, and pretty much like how should I put this? He also met one of the guys he would work with in the 1990s, a guy by the name Hamill King, who was a vampire private detective. He would work with him and another character who made his debut in the pages of Tomb of Dracula, Frank Drake, the modern day descendant of Dracula, who actually hates his own ancestor. And the thing is, Blade actually worked with an actual vampire hunter who actually is from the original Bram Stoker novel. Who is it? A character not many people know exists. Mainly because a lot of the time, whenever people, the movie creators who adapt Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula, they've tended to forget this character exists. Who is this character? Quincy Harker. Not Abraham Van Helsing. Oh no, they bring him up every time. But Quincy Harker? No, they never bring this guy up at all. His appearances have been very rare over the years. I mean, I would say probably his most prominent appearance in the Dracula movies was when he popped up Francis Ford Coppola's version of Dracula. And that actually had him... Now, the only film that actually did depict the actual ending of the book was a film from the late 70s. I know I'm getting off track when it comes to Blade and, of course, Dracula. Now, as in the case of Frank Drake's love interest, he had a love interest series named Rachel Van Helsing, who was the granddaughter of Abraham Van Helsing. She was later turned vampire and killed off in the annual for X-Men. She was killed by Wolverine. Just cuz. Then pretty much, well, by the time the 1910s rolled around, he pretty much got back to prominence again, because by the early 80s, he pretty much had fizzled out. And then by the 90s, thanks to a storyline called The Rise of the Midnight Suns, he got part of an organization known as the Night Stalkers, which, yes, this group did pop up in the movie, well, the third movie. I will get to that, don't worry. Which, pretty much, this group, like I said, is comprised of Blade himself, Hannibal King, and Frank Drake. Yeah, they were pretty much like a three-man team who had their own office. It actually had an actual ongoing series that got canceled after 18 issues. I read it. It's actually pretty good. It was probably canceled due to low sales. And I'll get to a theory I have about Blade later on. One of the most interesting issues of the book, he actually fought a robot from frickin' AIM. Yeah, he fought an AIM robot in the book. Yes, though the book did end after the events of Siege of Darkness, which was the third crossover. Now, they had three crossovers. The first was Rise of Midnight Suns, which started up the imprint Midnight Suns, and then you had the whole thing where Blade is turned to the Daywalker, an evil version of Blade, which he basically later regrets. And then at the events of Siege of Darkness, which was actually the ending of the Night Stalker series, Marvel did something completely unexpected when it came to Blade. They gave him his own solo book. Yes, an actual ongoing series. Who wrote it, you might ask? Well, the guy who wrote it was Ian Edgerton. But Terry Kavanagh, who basically is known for... Well, these two guys wrote the book, and Doug Waitley. Now, who is Ian Edgerton? Well, he's a British writer who also wrote some issues of X-Force. Well, he was actually one of the last writers of X-Force before it got relaunched at the time as X-Static. He was the original writer of the book, first 8 issues. The last couple were done by, of course, Terry Kavanagh, who actually is a really good writer. And then, of course, that book got canceled. He also had a basically like a one shot. Well, he appeared in Marvel Shadows and Light. He had a couple one shots like Christy Blue, Sends the Father. Yeah, basically like these two particular one shots. He had second volume, which only ran 6 issues. He had a one particular miniseries called Blade, Blood, and Allies, which is by Don McGregor, which I'm not that familiar with this guy very much. But he basically, well, at Marvel he did the Black Panther's Prey, and he was also the primary writer for the Killraven stories. Yep, and he was also writing the book Vampire Tales. Yep. He basically is also wrote some Vampirella. Yep. And then, now you might be asking, did Marv Wolfman ever write any of the volumes of Blade, you might ask? No, he never did. Actually, he did write some stuff for Blade, even though it's not listed here for some reason. Yes, he did write some stuff for Blade. Like, I think he did like a Blade miniseries. Let's see if I can find it here, because I know he did like a Blade miniseries, which I think was just this one. Let's see if I can find him here. Excuse me. Now I'm looking up right now because I remember reading some Blade books that were actually done by Marv Wolfman. Let's see. I thought he did. Could have sworn he did. I guess not. Maybe I was dreaming of it or whatever. Yeah. So basically, like, by the early 2000s, Blade decided to change his appearance to spotlight the Blade movie, which came out in the year 1998. Great movie. Love it. Has got some pretty bad CGI with it. I mean, most of the CGI for the movie is really good, except for the CGI in the final sequence of the movie, which is so bad. Like, I'm sure even Wesley Snipes himself basically is embarrassed by this utter nonsense with Deacon Frost. Yep. Though this did spark 2 sequels, Blade 2, which is really good, and Blade Trinity, which did feature the first live-action appearance of Hannibal King and the Night Stalkers, and a version of Dracula who is played by Dominic Bertrell, the guy who later played Heatwave on The Flash, who actually was a much more better character for the play than frickin' Dracula, which his version of Dracula was so bland, to say the least. And there are stories I've heard about Blade Trinity, like, oh, the fact that Wes would not come out with his trailer, he would not keep his eyes open during an actual frickin' shoot. He was also one of the producers of the movie, and he would frequently smoke weed on the set. And there is a story, I don't know if this is true or not. At one point, he was high on weed, and he decided to threaten to kill David S. Goyer on the frickin' set of Blade Trinity. Which, by the way, David S. Goyer, after this movie was made, this was the only movie he ever directed, because he was right back writing scripts after this, which I probably think is more strong because he's directing a frickin' movie. To know how Frank Miller directed The Spirit. Yep. Now, despite this, did this harm the comics at all? Not really at all. He was featured in a miniseries from the Max imprint, but he didn't do very much by the time late 90s, early 2000s rolled around. Like, it wasn't until like around 2006 Marvel decided to do something interesting with him. Give him an ongoing series, which did come out when I was reading comics. canceled after only 12 issues and had a couple issues that were tie-ins to, like, Civil War 1. Yes, oh, and prior to this happening, there was an issue of Marvel team no one ever expected ever to happen when it came to Blade. Blade did have a couple, team of a couple characters in the late 90s and mid 2000s. First one he teamed with was Spider-Man. Yes, he actually met Spider-Man for the first time in the late 90s. And I'm thinking, really? It took him that long to meet Spider-Man? I would have figured that he would have met him back in the 70s, like how Nova met him within his first year of publishing. Because Marvel wrote both books at that point. And I believe this is one of a few times Blade has met Spider-Man. And here's the thing. There was an issue of Marvel team that's become very infamous. Where Blade teamed up with the Punisher. Yes. And the tagline, if you read this list of it, it's a guy who kills criminals teams up with a guy who kills vampires. Yeah, one of the most hilarious ideas Marvel did with Marvel Team Up Volume 3. I like the first volume, which is probably a Spider-Man Team Up series, or Spider-Man Team Up, or in the case of Volume 2, which also was a Team Up, well, for Spider-Man first, then it was Namor. This book basically is like random characters teaming with each other. But it's by far one of the most hilarious things they've actually done with the character. Oh yes, definitely. Yeah. So, pretty much like, then after his book got canceled, he later pops up in the pages of Marvel Comic Presents for like one issue. Yes. He pops up for like a single issue of this book. Like, he pops up for a storyline for this. And then he pops up in Captain Britain MI-13 after this, where he joins becomes part of the group with the series with issue 5, and then 8 issues later, the series got canceled. Yeah, he was here just to deal with a vampire invasion. Also, this guy had his first ever girlfriend in the comics. Yes, Blade waited until the 2000s to give him a freaking girlfriend. And who is his girlfriend? It's a relationship that nobody bothers to acknowledge much anymore. Like, I don't know, maybe Marvel was embarrassed by the fact that, well, that he was even dating her. He dated Spitfire. Yes, a World War II superhero who should be old enough to be his own grandmother. Which, here's the thing about her. Okay, like, she is actually pretty young. Well, that was thanks in the 70s. I think it was back in the 80s, where she got a blood transfusion from Jim Hammond, which de-aged her like 20 years. And she's part of the Falsworth family. And she's maybe remarkably pretty young, despite her being a woman who's still supposed to be in her 80s. Yes. And the whole thing of her dating Blade is barely mentioned. Like, it pops up a few times, and it's almost like writers at Marvel forgot the fact these two were a couple because Blade doesn't bring her up at all. No, he doesn't. And after that book got canceled, he didn't, as far as I can tell, he didn't do much of anything until he popped up in the first arc for X-Men Volume 3. This came right after the events of Second Coming, which is a really good crossover. I highly recommend check out this one, where they decided to bring back the old X-Men series. And if you ever see the logo for it, they used the old classic logo from the 60s for this book. And he was in the very first arc, which basically felt like an actual event before it became a team-up book, part of a storyline known as The Curse of Mutants, where the story is the X-Men with Blade fighting vampires and the Vampire Nation. Yes, this is also the story where Jubilee gets turned into a vampire and remains a vampire up until 2018. Yes, so she was a vampire for 8 years, thanks to the story. And, like, what did he do after this particular storyline wrapped up? Nothing. Well, technically, no. He did pop up another book after this. 3 years later, in the pages of Mighty Avengers, where he was basically a character known as Spider Hero for like a couple issues. And then he became Ronin, and then it was Blade all along. And here's the weird thing about this. When he first showed up, not all people knew that this was Blade, until somebody decided to freaking leak it. Yeah, somehow this got leaked. And Al Ewing, who was the writer of the book at that point, oh, by the way, who wrote the last Blade book? Mark Guggenheim. Yes, Mark Guggenheim, one of the guys behind Arrow, wrote the series. The thing with Mark Guggenheim is the guy is actually a really good writer. He has wrote excellent comic books. I think one of his last known books I can think of he wrote was he basically wrote Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., a really good series that got canceled after only 10 issues. And you're thinking, really? Yes, really. It's by far one of the most baffling things related to the character. Mm-hmm. Yep. And then pretty much by the end of the New Avengers volume, which is issue 14, which had a really good story arc where it was basically a original sin tie-in, where it was revealed that apparently Luke Cage's father, James Lucas Sr., formed his own Avengers back in the 70s to fight vampires. Does this sound awesome or what? So after this story arc, Blade was off the Mighty Avengers team. And you might think, okay, what did he do next? He popped up in the annual for Uncanny Avengers. Pops up in Gwenpool. Does something here for like Secret Empire. And then in 2018, the most unusual thing ever happens with Blade. Blade joins the Avengers. Not the Mighty Avengers. The main team, where he's led by Black Panther. Yeah, Jason Aaron added him to the team. One of the most interesting ideas that Marvel ever did with the character. Add him part of the Avengers. He even was part of basically a Black Ops team known as Strike Force at events of War of the Realms, where he was not really the leader per se. It lasted for like 10 issues. Yeah, it was like 10 issues. And it got canceled due to... Was the pandemic, you might ask? No. Actually, it wasn't canceled. It was actually canceled due to the pandemic. Yes. And you're thinking, really? That's the reason why this series ended? Actually, it was issue 9. Yeah, it was a short-lived title. Actually, disbanded issue 10. Well, it was actually supposed to be issue 9. Yeah, it was canceled due to the pandemic. And it was a pretty interesting series that Marvel just didn't care about. Yes. Of course, the team was comprised of Spider-Woman, Winter Soldier, Angela, Wiccan, Damien Hellstrom, Blade himself, and Monica Rambeau. Excuse me. Yes. I love this series. It was by far the only thing Blade was featured aside from Avengers. He still gets featured in the book pretty prominently. And then recently, just this year, when they had the whole thing of Heroes Reborn, get this. Like, everyone was affected because of Heroes Reborn. And do you know who the one person was completely unaffected by the reality altering changes of Heroes Reborn? You might be thinking, was it Wolverine? No, it was Blade. Yes, Blade was the main character of the story. Well, the main person trying to undo the events of Heroes Reborn, which at the end of the story, now part of this, there was a new version of the Squadron Supreme. The Squadron Supreme America, which was comprised of people who just were hired by the U.S. government to do their own premier superhero team due to the fact the Avengers moved out of New York and they moved to the North Pole, which they still are there this very day. Now, Blade himself, Now, you might think, does Blade appear outside of the main Avengers book? Aside from, well, Strike Force and, of course, the main Avengers book? Not that I can think of, no. And it is weird, though. Like, of all people to be unaffected by the effects of Heroes Reborn, it's Blade? Yes, freaking Blade. And he has taken part in some stuff after. Like, he also did pop up for a Spirits of Vengeance miniseries, which was really good, by the way. He did play a small role in Heroes Reborn, not Heroes Reborn, in War of the Realms. And he also did pop up for, like, one issue of King in Black, which he didn't do a lot in that one. I mean, his most recent appearance, aside from appearing in issue 48 of Avengers, he's also been appearing in Thor. Yes, for some reason, Donnie Cohen decided to appear in Thor and the Darkhold Alpha book. Yeah, Darkhold is an event that it's just reality altering stuff. Like, it's a dark version of classic origin stories. Like, the most first issue that came out was Iron Man. Yes, where it was a standalone story, which had basically Iron Man. It's like more of a darker version of his backstory. If I first got the suit. Yep. It's by far a really interesting thing that Marvel has done with basically the Darkhold. Yes. So, he also did appear for the Curse of Man-Thing stuff, which is quite interesting for him. Appears in Missions of Venom, but mostly he's been appearing in the pages of Avengers. Yes. A lot of people think this is quite weird for Blade to do, given the fact he hunts vampires. But what else Marvel's going to do? I mean, not feature Hannibal King anytime soon. No, not really. Oh, by the way, is he considered an agent of MI13? Yes. Also, here's some interesting, though. You might find this interesting. Blade's coat that he wears used to belong to Wolverine. And you're thinking, really? Yes, really. Yeah, for some reason, despite the fact that MI13 really hasn't done much, aside from appearing in that Revolution crossover, this organization has practically done nothing. No, seriously, they've done not a lot. Like, they pop up here and there, they pop up with Wolverine, and most recently they appeared in the Excalibur series, with Blade does not appear in. No, not really. That's another place, but he's still technically an agent of MI13, which is by far one of the most interesting things they've done with Blade, aside from, well, being an Avenger. Now, you might find this interesting, though. Blade is British. Yes, he is in fact British. Yeah, he was born in the UK. Where does he live, per se? You could say the US, because he still lives there. Yes. He was basically born in Soho, London. Yeah, that's where he basically was born. Now, aside from appearing in these three movies, Blade has also appeared in one episode of Spider-Man the Animated Series. And you're thinking, really? One episode of that? Yes. Actually appeared in a few episodes. And then you had the Blade TV show. I have watched it. It is an interesting show. They replaced Wesley Snipes with a rapper named Sticky Fingers. Excuse me. He's also appeared in Ultimate Spider-Man, Agents of Smash, Hulk Agents of Smash. He also appeared in Marvel Death Wars Avengers. He even had his own anime series. Yep. Marvel Anime Blade, which I haven't watched it yet. The only one I've watched of Marvel Anime is Iron Man, but that was really good. I thoroughly enjoyed that. Now, Blade, there was something a few years ago that they did announce for Blade that did not come to fruition at all, where he was supposed to have an ongoing series. There's something done by Tim Seeley. Yes. This was back in 2015. He was supposed to have a brand new ongoing series. Or was supposed to feature Blade and his daughter. Yes, Blade and his daughter. I'm sure for a lot of people, this sounded interesting. And then nothing. This was about 6 years ago. That was one of the most relevant things they did with the character. Trying to give an ongoing series for him. But they didn't really do anything much with it. It's been rumored the project's been canceled. I've not heard any confirmation about that. No, not really. Some of the writers I should mention, though, who wrote Blade, Christopher Golden. Some people might recognize this writer as the frequent collaborator of Mike Mignola in the Hellboy books, and he also wrote Punisher Purgatory. Yep. There is also Bill Sienkiewicz. Yep, he got a chance to do some Blade book. He wrote Blade 1/2. We also had Blade Night Stalking, done by Jimmy Palmiotti and Amanda Connor. Interesting. Yes. He also had some books there was an adaptation of Blade by David S. Goyer and the late Steve Gerber. Yep. There's also, the second volume of Blade was by Christopher Hines, which was canceled probably due to low sales. Let's see. Mark Andrego. Yes, Mark Andrego wrote a one-shot for Blade back in 1998. I think it was just prior to the movie coming out. Yes. And it's one of the few books he's actually wrote for DC. The DC Marvel. Yeah, the guy hasn't done really that much at all. Yeah, he wrote a one-shot for Blade, a one-shot for Doctor Strange, a story for Shadows of Light, a annual for Wolverine, something called What? Huh? For Secret Wars 2. And he wrote the first arc for Captain America Bucky, the live episode of Bucky Barnes, which is really good. I do highly recommend checking it out. But mostly, the guy is stuck DC, writing a lot of good stuff. Like Manhunter, he wrote one stuff for Oliver Kai, he wrote the Nightwing, story for Nightwing Annual. Yes, I do know about his run for Batwoman. I'll eventually get to that, don't worry about that. He wrote some issues of Birds of Prey. He was actually the last writer of the book before it was relaunched in New 52. He wrote the Black Lightning story for DC Universe Presents. He wrote some issues of Sword of Sorcery, wrote Stalker, who is a Steve Gilbert character. He wrote Wonder Woman 77, which was basically a few specials. Batman 6 meets Wonder Woman 77. He wrote some issues of the series Ferris, which is a really good spin-off title. He wrote Convergence, Batman the Outsiders, that's Hawkman, Adam Strange / Future Quest, Harvey and Ivy meet Betty and Veronica. And he was also, the most recent thing he did is that he was the second to last writer of Supergirl, which I have reviewed. I think it's a pretty. I check out my reviews for that run. You'll get my feelings about that. But that's the most recent thing he did for DC. The guy is a pretty good writer when he's not writing other stuff here. But some people probably could say his most prominent work at DC. Well, the first book people think of is his book Manhunter. Yes. That is probably by far his most, let's just say most noteworthy book per se that he wrote. Yes. Yes, indeed. But yeah. But in the case of Blade himself, great character, and I do recommend checking out his stuff. And the weird thing, and you might be asking, Nick, is there any trades that collect any of Blade's work? Like, that's not associated with books? Like any of his slow working trade? Yes. Yes, it is. There is actually a few trades. There is Blade Vampire Slayer Black and White, which doesn't contain Vampire Tales 8 through 9, Marvel Premiere 3 and 8, Shadows and Light, and Blade #1. There's Undead by Dying Light, which contains some issues of Tomb of Dracula and Crescent Blues. There is also Blood and Chaos, which contains some of his appearances from the 1990s, which this is really interesting to read. And the volume that was considered to be his longest volume to date, the one that lasts from 2006 to 2007, volume 6 of the series, done by Guggenheim. That book is actually a trade, and there's also a complete collection of that trade. But yeah, in the case of Blade, that's going to be pretty much it to talk about for him, because great character. I do recommend checking out his stuff. You have to basically do the stuff. The thing with him is trying to track down some of his early solo works from the '90s. It is probably pretty difficult for you unless you look up online. That's my only suggestion: is look up online to read it because it's good stuff. Nothing really bad about these books at all. No, not really. The original Blade book, the one that's called Blade the Vampire Hunter, which is considered to be his very first volume, had a really cool cover. Let me show it off here. Excuse me. I want to show this up before I close this video out. Let's see if I can find it here. Here it is. Here's the very first issue of the very first Blade comic ever released. That's the cover for it. Really good looking cover. Yes, it has the butt boob pose, but it's for Blade. But it's a really good It's a really good cover. He's never had particularly a bad cover per se, and he did have in their book. He almost forgot to talk about this. He had a one shot where he fought frickin' Wolverine. Yes, this was a one shot released 2 years ago. This is part of the stuff they released for Wolverine, which, by the way, this was a series of one-shots that released for him that, to my knowledge, there's no trade for these issues. No, it's just kind of weird, like Wolverine versus Captain America. It's one of these series of one-shots that Marvel just did for him. That they just did this for him instead of giving another ongoing series. It took them a while to do that. Yep. So that's going to be pretty much it for this particular review. Oh, before I close, I have to talk about this. In the late 90s, when the first Blade movie came out, and I have to discuss it before I close the video, because basically, if I don't, people will remind me in the comments below. In the late 90s, Marv Wolfman sued Marvel over the rights to Blade and Nova. And to my knowledge, I believe he lost. Yes. This could explain the reason why he wasn't really featured that very much at all. No. Yeah. The lawsuit was ruled in favor of Marvel, and that could explain why that Marv Wolfman stayed away from Marvel all this time. I mean, his last special book he did for Marvel Comics was the Marvel Team number 7. That was probably his last special comic he ever did for Marvel. I'm looking up. Yeah, that's his last comic he did. He did, I think this was the issue where Spider-Man teamed with Blade. But yes, this was pretty much by far the last time that Marvel ever worked for Marvel. Yeah, that's the most interesting thing about it. Is the fact that, yes, this is like the last book he ever wrote for Marvel, and he never came back after this one issue where Spider-Man teamed with Blade for this issue of Marvel Team Up. Yep. Yeah, never did anything else. I'm sure that Wolfman himself would not mind signing. I don't know if Wolfman himself would ever sign any Blade comics, even though he himself had nothing to do with him at all. But it all depends. Like, he could, but it all depends upon his mood. I'm sure he would sign definitely stuff like Deathstroke or Cyborg stuff. He'd probably sign those no problem. But any of his Marvel stuff, that's up for debate, basically, when it comes to him. And I can't ask Gene Cohen about this because he's no longer alive. Yes. Gene Cohen, who was a frequent collaborator of Marvel, even basically worked on a book, the Night Force, really good series. And he was also a really good writer. He passed away 10 years ago. And you're thinking, really? 10 years? Yes, I was reading comics at this point, but the thing is, this is before I started going to Comic-Cons. I didn't start going to Comic-Cons until like 2014, 3 years after this man's death. So I never got a chance to meet Gene Cohen. If I ever get a chance to meet anybody who worked with him, I will ask him, what was he like when he was alive? Because I have always been a fan of Gene Cohen's work. He is so good. And at DC, probably by far, when it comes to him, the one book where his artwork fit perfectly with the character is Batman. Yes. Because he has a gothic art style. If anybody's ever checked this guy's work, he's always had a particular style he always does every time he draws a comic book. And it's more of a gothic art style, which I like that. I have never heard anybody complain about the late Gene Cohen's work at all. I mean, I'm sure Marv Wolfman himself was taking some flack for some work over the years, but Gene Cohen? No, I've never heard any bad word about him. But if I were to get a chance to meet anybody who actually worked with him, who actually is still alive besides Marv Wolfman, of course, that would be interesting. I personally would love it. One person I would definitely ask what it was like to work with him is, of course, Jerry Conway. He has worked with him before. He's probably by far the only person I have met who actually has worked with, well, Gene Cohen. Yeah. You know, I can personally think of anyways. So, yes. So, I'm definitely ending it here. So, until you see the next review, which I think we'll do Comic Core next. I'm going to do Case Close. Do it next, okay? Take video. Bye.